The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
So I get into these creative discipline jags in my life, and one year I decided to write a haiku every day, and starting in January I decided I'm going to write a cartoon every day. And I've kept it up, and I have to assure you, most of them are really, really awful. But I'll take the topic we have coming up, and that'll kind of be the subject of a cartoon, and sometimes I'll put them up on Facebook announcing the next class. So this topic is on why I meditate. So a couple of the captions I kind of came up with thinking about this. One is that one reason I meditate is that it's a legal way to sit around and do nothing. Another is I get to rest my texting thumbs. And I get to spend time with someone who really needs to be listened to. I think maybe that's the best one. I've been thinking about this, and I have been meditating pretty regularly. It shocks me to say this, for about 47 years. And it's an interesting question. Why do I still practice? Why is this meditation still so important to me? When I think about why I was interested in it, was I wanted to feel better, I wanted to think better, and I wanted to feel more whole in my life. And mostly I just wanted to be happy. And those are still the reasons why I meditate. But I wanted to talk tonight a little bit around meditation from the perspective of body, mind, and spirit. I was 15 when I learned transcendental meditation, and pretty miserable at age 15. I think I was 6'5" and about 140 pounds when I was 15. Pretty confused, pretty horribly self-conscious. And I just sort of heard about this invitation to learn how to meditate. And I was raised a Quaker, and the Quakers talked about, this still small voice within all the time, but no one ever taught me how to tune into that still small voice. So when I learned transcendental meditation, which was a form of mantra meditation, I was a little confused by, the bells and smells, and, there was a puja, which was completely new to me as part of it, but as I was guided into this meditation practice, something just clicked, and I just had this kind of a felt sense knowing that I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life. There's something really, really significant and important, and I am really grateful, so grateful that I was turned on to this practice at such a young age. And which is why I'm so excited we have our teen Sangha happening, because to get turned on to these practices at that age, incredible. And so we've all been stimulated in some way. What is this meditation stuff? There's some intuitive sense that this has got to be good for me. Last year, I got a call from someone in the National Security Agency, the NSA, and they're going through really challenging times at the NSA, and they called some national meditation group, and they gave them my name. I don't know how they got it, but we talked, and they needed a presentation because Lieutenant General McMaster was in charge of the NSA at that time, and he had to sign off on all the trainings they did. So he wanted a one-pager before he would approve it. And I was a little intimidated having to put together a kind of a one-pager for him. But then I thought, well, let me look up if there's been any research done by the military on mindfulness. I was blown away by the scholarship that has been done on the effect of mindfulness on leadership, on team building, on stress management, its effect on recidivism rates. All this work has been done by the armed forces of looking at the impact of mindfulness. So it made it really easy to do my one-pager, and it got approved pretty quickly. And I gave the presentation. It went really, really well. They were really excited, and we talked about doing more. And then 4 days later, he was fired, and I never heard from him again. But it was a fun afternoon I had with him. But that's the amazing thing about meditation. And I know I've kind of gone on this jag a little bit, but just to kind of repeat it, here's this practice that of course has been really inherent in human consciousness for a really, really long time. But when we look back in our personal history a couple thousand years ago, a lot of this was really brought forth by the Buddha. In northern India, on the border of Nepal, this practice of awakening. And of course, there was no other communication devices other than just word of mouth and trade routes. So the practice, it went viral in its own way. People told other people about this transformative practice, and it went down into Southeast Asia, into the jungles, where it kept its very orthodox quality. So if you go to Sri Lanka or to the jungles, you'll get the teachings as they were kind of originally taught. But they made their way up into Nepal, and they fused with the animistic qualities of that culture. They went to China, took on those qualities there, went to Japan, took on the Zen quality, and to Korea, kind of the fierce sort of inquiry Kensho approach, came to the West, and we just scienced the heck out of it. Sliced it, diced it, double-blind studies. What happens in the brain when you do this? And as a result, there's this acceptance in the military. It's in public schools. Insurance companies are now underwriting meditation because they save money. CEOs and business people are looking at it because people become more awake and lit up and alive. When I got into this 47 years ago, it was incredibly marginal stuff, incredibly threatening, the whole idea of meditation. And it's so exciting now to see how accepted it has been. But one of the very, very first researchers was in 1972, Dr. Herbert Benson, who was studying transcendental meditation. And he was wondering, I wonder if I could duplicate this amazing feeling I'm having if I could do this in a lab. It so turns out he was a Harvard professor and had access to a lab. And so he coined a term called the relaxation effect, where basically he was able to identify the stress response, that when there's a perceived threat, there are very, very typical things your body will go through, in reactivity, where your blood is shunted away from the core, the capillaries dilate, your eyes dilate, so you can run away or fight. But what he noticed was that practicing a few simple techniques, all of that reversed, where we went from a stress response to a relaxation response. And essentially, it was to close your eyes, select a time period where you won't be disturbed, choose a mental object. When your mind wanders, come back to that mental object. That's it. So we know that stress, basically, you can say there are three levels of stress. There's the alarm. There's sort of the immediate alarm that something horrible is going to happen. And of course, that can be physical, but mostly in our culture now, it's psychological. But when you have a very stressful call to make with someone that you're dreading, your body doesn't interpret that any different than it would as if you were being chased by a bear. You're under threat. So we have the alarm. And then we sort of have what it's like to live under sort of chronic stress, of what happens if your stress level doesn't get relieved. And then the exhaustion you go into when the stress doesn't get relieved. So the bad news is that we're under stress all the time. And the good news is that it's actually possible to dramatically shift your relationship to stress. And the side effects of this practice are amazing. As I like to say, if meditation was a drug, it would be considered the miracle drug of this era. If you can get the results from meditation in a pill, it would be amazing. So, just to list some of the benefits of meditation, now the kind of quantified, accepted benefits of meditation: stress reduction, controlling anxiety, promoting emotional health, enhancing self-awareness, lengthening your attention span. We're finding now that it may reduce age-related memory loss. It can spontaneously generate kindness, improve sleep, helps control pain, and can decrease blood pressure. So all this stuff coming out of this practice of closing your eyes, selecting a time when you're not disturbed, choosing a mental object. When the mind wanders, come back to that mental object. It's amazing. So for me, at 15, when I started doing this practice of 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon, which is sort of the transcendental meditation prescription, I noticed I was more calm. I was less reactive. And I was more self-directed. My self-consciousness just began to kind of recede a little bit, and I started doing what I was enjoying. I felt more creative. I remember thinking to myself, I've never felt this okay in my life. And again, it's one of the reasons why it's so powerful, not only for us to practice, but for anyone who can get into this when they're young. One retreat, I just kind of feel the emotion as I think about it now. We did a 7-day retreat. There was an older man who was his first retreat that he did. And at the lunch afterward, where everyone can talk, he went around to every young person and just shook their hand and said, I want to tell you how fortunate you are to have found this practice at this age. So one thing that Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, who founded TM, said, and I've shared this before, it's a total cliche. He said, you water the root and enjoy the fruit. And it is extraordinary of what happens when you take time to deeply just rest in presence, how everything gets informed. Your physiology shifts, your emotional resilience shifts, your mental clarity shifts. It's also important to say that this practice is not for everyone. This practice of meditation is contraindicated. And perhaps I'll do a talk sometime on those for whom meditation is not helpful. But for the majority of us, it really can be. So we tend to have this physiological response. The more dynamic your rest, the more dynamic your activity. And when you can train yourself to begin to rest in presence, it begins to inform your physiology. But it also informs your mental clarity. I feel so fortunate to do what I do, to be teaching and sharing these practices and working closely with people in these practices, and have witnessed so many healings in so many ways. And just one story I wanted to share was a very successful executive who built his company up and sold his company for a lot of money to a bigger company. And as quite often happens, when you sell a company to a bigger company, you stay on to run it for a while. And that assures them that they're going to get the quality control. And so that's what he did. And there was a big payout if he could meet some numbers. And he was looking forward to that. This was his way out. He'd be done, do what he wanted to with the rest of his life. But what he discovered was that his division, what was his company was now a division, and a larger company was now in direct competition with another division. And the head of the other division was someone who went to school with the CEO. They were buddies. And suddenly he found himself, from being the CEO or running his own business, to being more and more fearful and getting caught in jealousy. And he began to become so distracted by the competition and the fear that he was feeling that it became harder and harder for him to make decisions. And he was losing his ability for critical thinking. And so when we talked, he was really trapped in pretty chronic anxiety. He was really caught in a fear of failure, his whole life dream not coming through. He was also caught in a lot of anger, feeling like he was set up, and there was no way that he could get through this. And he noticed that he was beginning to take it out on his family. When we're under stress, we tend to either go toward fight or flight or freeze, toward aggression, anger, judgment, blame, or toward disassociation, or simply being frozen, unable to respond. And he noticed that for him, he was getting more and more angry, more and more short-fused and impatient. The people who were really loyal to him were beginning to kind of pull back, and he was seeing everything begin to fall apart. And so he started to deepen his meditation practice, even though you may have heard the story of the Zen monk who says, every day I meditate for 20 minutes, except when I'm really, really busy, and then I meditate for 45. But the more you've got going on in your life, the more you need to be on retreat. And so somehow he was able to sense the wisdom in that, so he tried to step back more, really kind of out of desperation. And we talked about what are called the three poisons, these three energies in life that truly poison the mind. And one of them is greed, just being caught in desire, in wanting mind, a deep dissatisfaction with what is, and a sense that there's something out there that's going to fix it. And the second poison is the poison of hatred, of anger, judgment, blame, and ill will. And the third is the poison of delusion or confusion. That's when you're believing things that are true when they're not, or you're not believing things when they are true. And he began to see that how driven he was and how caught he was in these three poisons. And then his meditation practice began to shift to not try to fix anything, but just to see it. Was it possible, as we talked in that meditation of non-judging awareness, was it possible to take that seat of the witness and just observe this play of these three poisons in his life? And he began to notice that if he could just name it, he began to feel a little bit lighter. Just naming the hatred, naming the confusion, brought in a little more space. But as we say in this practice, that to be aware is only half of the practice. To see clearly is only half. The other half of the practice is cultivating your heart that can hold it. cultivating your capacity to hold what you see. And this began the transformational shift for him. To begin to simply recognize the pain that he was feeling and the fear that he was feeling. And then one day he had an insight. He realized that all of his attention was on the results. And where he really needed to focus his attention was on the process. He was being destroyed by fear and anxiety just by naming it and bringing a little bit of kindness. He was seeing how it was utterly destroying him. And so he began to pay attention to the why. Why was this business important to him? Why was everything he was doing important to him? And he realized that he loved the product that he had created, that he loved empowering people around him, that he loved making things happen. He loved the idea of being freed up to really serve in other ways when he could complete these next few years in this job. And that's when things began to shift. When he was able to recognize how trapped he was in fear and anxiety and reconnect with a deeper purpose underneath it. We so easily get trapped. And we so easily get trapped by our own point of view. As the saying goes, the world is divided into people who think they're right. That's the end of the statement. And so somehow we need to see more clearly. The analogy, which is oftentimes overused, is you take a glass of muddy water, set it on a countertop, and let it alone, the silt will begin to settle. It's that same way when you practice meditation. You sit and you watch the insanity of the mind. But over time, sometimes, there can be a settling. Just this morning, after our meditation, my wife was sharing how there are all these business possibilities she has, and she's really been wrestling with them, but she realized that just sitting provided the solution. At the end of her meditation, she just felt like, oh yeah, this and this and this. And it's so counterintuitive. I was raised a Quaker, as I said, and one of the great lines the Quakers use is, don't just do something, sit there. So the effect of meditation on the mind is quite extraordinary, particularly when we're caught in anxiety and this kind of jet-fueled society we're living in with so much information. Some very interesting studies now on ADHD, the effect of meditation. That they've taken people who they do a training for 2 hours a week and a home practice for 5 to 15 minutes over 8 weeks with a definitive result that all the participants were able to stay on focused tasks. They were less depressed and less anxious. And now I was just listening on the radio today when I was driving of how there's been a movement that when kids are diagnosed with ADHD is to immediately put them on stimulants. But now they're trying what they're calling behavioral approaches first, which is basically mindfulness training. That when you go through this mindfulness training, it has a very, very direct impact on the way your brain processes information. And even if you do move into the stimulants of Ritalin and so forth, it's much more effective at a lower dose. That's very exciting to me. So if you struggle with ADHD, and a lot of us do, I love the definition of ADHD as attention deficit disorder, high definition. Starting small can be really helpful. It doesn't have to be a long meditation, a short meditation. Sometimes having a soundtrack can be helpful for you. And also to build it in as a ritual, like little rituals through the day, the mindful moments. When the phone rings, take a breath. When you boot up the computer, close your eyes. Little moments like that can help to make a difference. The other fascinating arena is now exploring what happens with aging brains when you meditate. In the aging process, the aging factors such as diet and exercise and lifestyle and education plays a big part. There's genetics, but then there's also neuroplasticity. Certainly you may have noticed how for some people as they get older, there's a tendency to get more rigid in their thoughts, more rigid in their feelings. They tend to get more attached to kind of fixed outcomes. Meditation, again, strong indications now that it wakes up your brain. Because the brain has all this neuroplasticity that the cognitive functioning of the brain gets dramatically enhanced through this practice. So the stimulation of the brain alone is worth the price of admission, I think. But beyond just the body and beyond just the mind, there's this call to feel more whole. And meditation, again, plays a very, very important part there. And as I've often said, when you meditate, you feel better. You feel your sadness better, your depression better, your anger better. That's all part of this practice, that you begin to feel more whole. There's sort of like the low-hanging fruit when you begin to practice. Oh, I feel so much more clear. But then you begin to recognize, wow, there's stuff kind of below the line that's sort of coming up to the surface. And that can be a challenging part of the practice. Again, once on a retreat, and there's something very powerful. If you really want to amp up your practice, do a residential retreat sometime. There's nothing like it. An undistracted period of days and days and days where you're simply focusing on being present. There was a woman who was just sharing that there was something showing up in her practice. She couldn't name it. She could just feel it. Kind of a restlessness, kind of a neediness. And her dad had died maybe 6 months before the retreat, and she didn't really feel good about his passing and how all that went on. But as she was just sitting with this unsettledness, she had a very strong desire just to leave the retreat, because she said, I'm not getting anything out of this. It's just kind of constant irritation. And I encouraged her just to stay with it. Just stay with the practice and actually investigate kind of that discomfort and the unsettledness. And as she settled, she realized that part of this sort of dissatisfaction kept going back to her dad, to the passing. Her father was distant and aloof and kind of withholding with her. And she tried that practice of not trying to figure it out, but just to get familiar with it, just the willingness just to be with it, which can be excruciating. And then in one meditation, suddenly something happened. When she suddenly clicked into his point of view. And then she realized how chronically stressed her dad was. How there was this specter of his parents who lived at a very, very old age, were very demanding of him. He was always trying to please them and always trying to please her mother, and she was never satisfied. And she realized how depressed her father was, and she never really saw it. And somehow that shifted for her. There was a sense of now I see it. I wasn't seeing it before. And suddenly her heart began to respond. And again, that's kind of the beauty of the practice. So much of the practice is learning how to become more comfortable with our discomfort. I have two ways of practicing meditation. I have what I call my maintenance meditation. That's if I know I meditate this much every day, I'll be okay at the end of the day. And then I have what I think of as my transformational meditation. And that's when I can spend more time or go deeper. And that's either when I go on a retreat, when I can really set aside time to just rest in presence and try to welcome whatever is here, whatever arises. There's a story which I have shared before, but it's a story of a monk who lived way back in the hills, and it took 3 days of hiking to go and see this monk. Everyone who went to see this monk came back transformed. And when you would go to see this monk, it was kind of arduous. You'd walk for 3 days, and then he would make you promise that you wouldn't share the question he was going to ask. I'm going to share it with you. And then he would ask them, what are you not willing to feel? What are you not willing to feel? And then you would spend your 3 days walking back into civilization. How often do we have the courage to ask that question? What am I not willing to feel? If you truly wish to feel more whole, then that question is a prerequisite, the willingness to go there. And again, from my perspective of having practiced these years and teaching and having the privilege of working with people, what an extraordinary practice this is. It will inevitably guide you to feeling more whole. It can't not. It takes incredible resilience and incredible courage. And in many ways, that's why it's helpful to practice with others who really want what you want. So there's mind, there's body, there's the emotional resilience that results from our practice. And then there's this promise of meditation that points toward happiness and freedom. And what does that mean? I thought I'd read you, and we have just a few minutes left, this piece from Rumi that just points toward this possibility of what does it mean to be free? If you like, you can close your eyes. When you do things from your soul, you feel a river moving in you, a joy. When actions come from another section, the feeling disappears. Don't let others lead you. They may be blind, or worse, vultures. Reach for the rope of God. And what is that? Putting aside self-will. Because of willfulness, people sit in jail. The trapped bird's wings are tied. Fish sizzle in the skillet. The anger of police is willful. You've seen a magistrate inflict visible punishment. Now see the invisible. If you could leave your selfishness, you would see how you have been torturing your soul. We are born and live inside black water in a well. How could we know what an open field of sunlight is? Don't insist on going where you think you want to go. Ask the way to the spring. Your living pieces will form a harmony. There is a moving palace that floats in the air with balconies and clear water flowing through. Infinity everywhere, yet contained under a single tent. For me, this reading points toward the deepest question, which is, what and who are you really? What is this mystery of this life, this living, breathing body that you're inhabiting now that you know is going to fall away in no particular order? One of the elements, or the three elements of meditation I most like and I often lead, as we did this morning, earlier this evening, is that there's an element of willfulness in this practice. As you guide your attention back to the here and now, there is a natural calming and natural settling, and it requires a will, it requires resilience to move away, sever identification with a thinking mind, and come back to this raw experience of here and now. There's another element of the practice, which is taking the seat of the witness, non-identified, intimately relaxed, aware of all the details, but at the same time aware of what's changing. And then it points toward this third quality, this quality of releasing all desire, your capacity to simply rest in presence, to surrender to the here and now. And perhaps we can close with just a few minutes of practice. And so if you like, again, you might just take a few moments to notice how intimately you can bring your attention to your breathing or to the sounds, or to any sense of aliveness, pulse, or tingling. And here there is a willful calling to here and now. And you may sense, as you draw yourself right now, right here, there's also the witness. The awareness that everything is changing. And much of your experience are like weather systems passing through, and yet you are the one who is aware. And you might sense, if just for a moment, as Rumi said, to reach for the rope of God. And what is that? Putting aside self-will, just for the next moment. What does it mean to let it be? To be without desire. In these final moments, you might just take some time to reflect on what has called you to practice. And is there a sense of of what you would need to cultivate a practice that feels alive. A sense of what you would need to stay engaged. And sensing these two wings of this practice, the wing of seeing clearly, the wing of wisdom, and this wing of compassion. In these final moments, you might take a moment to wish yourself well. And whatever fruit may arise from your practice, offering the fruit to yourself. Imagine your path filled with a greater sense of ease. And whatever fruits may arise from your practice, imagine you could offer the fruit of your practice freely to those who are closest to you. And may these beings benefit. And imagine this offering spreading out to all beings in all directions. May all beings benefit from the fruit of your practice. And as you're ready, you can gently deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes.